So I watched the school board meeting last night with all the parents who came to speak out based on Project Veritas revealing a communist teacher emotionally abusing his students and encouraging the idolization of literally all the most genocidal, insane communist leaders throughout history in his classroom. Not only did this man have Mao on the wall of his classroom and an Antifa flag, but he was using stamps of Stalin, Mao, and Kim Jong-un to mark his students' papers. Similarly, another teacher was recently suspended for encouraging her students to perform the Pledge of Allegiance to the Pride flag instead of the American flag. No, that's not just kindness to LGBTQ plus people, that is political indoctrination. The classroom is supposed to nurture free thinking, free thought, free thought, free thought. Free thought is the bedrock of learning, period. This is the weaponization of the classroom to turn children into political pawns without the ability to understand what they're being indoctrinated into, which is why this teacher said he had to scare the out of them to make them revolutionaries in 180 days. And this is during the most politically polarized time in human history. This is extremely harmful to children. So let me make it clear here. Free-thinking children is what we need, not politicized children. So if there was a right-wing extremist teaching a class and using the classroom in this weaponized way, it would be just as wrong. The problem is that it has truly become left-wing extremists that have infiltrated so many different areas of our society and made it dangerous for children. These two teachers are a meager example of how extreme the dangers are to children when highly indoctrinated left-wing people obtain positions of power in regards to children. How far can these dangers really go? Let's look at the example of CD, a man whose name and face I literally cannot share because the Canadian government has issued a publications ban restricting all public discussions using his name or face. So what's his story? The extreme left in Canada has managed to use schools in tandem with local politicized therapists and physicians to remove parental rights entirely. CD had a daughter in public school in British Columbia. Unbeknownst to him and his wife, for years she was being quietly indoctrinated by a specialized therapist whose job it is to transition children. This was unfolding with zero knowledge of the parents. When did they truly find out that the gender politics of their daughter's school had gone too far? When it was revealed that the therapist she was seeing through the school had already set up hormonal treatment to permanently transition their daughter. This means lifelong sterility for this child. This means a medical experiment which has no data on long-term studies has now been performed on their daughter. CD has publicly accepted that he has lost his child to this process and wants other parents to be warned that the law is now politicized and against them.
The truth is the government doesn't give a crap about my child. They care about an ideology that is far left driven, and they don't want parents to know that they're doing any of this stuff. And that's why this is so important for them today, is to arrest me, because they need me to remain quiet. They don't want this coming out.
The therapist who was responsible for this is on record bragging about transitioning over 500 children. One he exclaimed wasn't even 3 yet. Are 3-year-olds too young to change genders? Transgender researchers disagree. So the transgender researchers decide, not the parents. That's the point here. They're not just researchers now. They have the power to get your child transitioned, not only without your knowledge, but even against your will once you find out. This therapist, whose name and identity is also being hidden by the Canadian government, admitted to encouraging children and parents to pretend the child is suicidal to get government-paid transitions. The consent form they had this girl sign overtly stated that they do not know the long-term effects of this transition, or the potential illnesses, or the potential harms it could lead to. And this is the informed consent this child was coerced into by everyone but her parents. Let me get a little deeper into the left-wing extremism actually in the school to show you how bad it is. The school system in British Columbia relies on a program called SOGI. It is, in essence, the mechanism by which children are being indoctrinated into the idea that there are infinite genders, and that if you don't identify with cultural notions of male or female, you may need permanent, life-altering procedures without involving your parents at all. Soji states that teachers can no longer refer to children as boys or girls. They can no longer use the terms mom and dad or mother and father when talking about families. But all of this, of course, is put under the guise of anti-bullying. Right. Was this program put in place because parents in British Columbia were rising up, demanding that their children be put into a program that states that family and gender are to become endlessly vague, continuously divisive concepts? No. No, there was no consultation with parents, with taxpayers. It was just a politicized curriculum inserted by the government through a speedy change of the BC Human Rights Code. End of story. The best example of how evil the trickery of this entire indoctrination system is the blatant hypocrisy being taught in the intersex portion of the curriculum. Here's some of the YouTube content this curriculum directs the teachers to show their children for discussion.
When a beautiful little intersex baby comes into the world, doctors and parents are eager to assign it a sex and a gender. These assignments are based on babies' genitals, whether they have something that looks more like a clitoris or more like a penis. Now, for some intersex conditions, you can't even tell by looking. You know, it might be chromosomal and the person doesn't know till much later in their life. So they get assigned male or female and they go on their way. But if it's not so readily obvious, doctors will just sort of arbitrarily pick a sex, usually based on whether or not they think that your genitals could penetrate something that is what makes a male, which when you think about it is a really weird standard.
Okay. Let me explain that you have no possible data that could ever show a large portion of doctors thinking about a newborn infant's penis penetrating anything. That doctor would be a pedophile. And why you personally framed it this way may only be answered by the therapy that you definitely need.
Intersex describes a person who doesn't fit the typical definition of male or female.
I have XY chromosomes, but typical female genitalia.
I'm a girl who has testes and XY chromosomes.
I identify as a queer, gender nonconforming intersex person.
Often, intersex people get surgeries that they don't want, and transgender people have to fight for surgeries that they do want.
They did a surgery to remove my testes and told my parents to take me home and just raise me as a girl, and I didn't find out about it myself until I was 12.
Here, the children are introduced to what is supposed to be activism for children born with things like irregular genitalia. Doctors often perform normalizing surgery on intersex people without medical reasons. So, don't medically modify their bodies because there isn't sufficient medical reasoning to do so? Okay, got it. But pretend you're suicidal and then medically alter the child's body, okay? Right. Got it. Okay, so here's the thing. I agree that some of the gender normalizing surgeries were dangerous and wrong. Are dangerous and wrong. I agree that there is room for a lot of darkness when a baby is born with something this medically and culturally nebulous, and the anxiety of the parents and the doctor become the deciding factors on how to proceed. There is truth to the trauma of finding out way later in life that you were surgically altered at birth because of this. I also get why NBC is using headlines like, "You can't undo surgery," to tell a story of parents deciding how to help their intersex baby. Parents! Or why Human Rights Watch is issuing reports on harmful surgeries on intersex children. So, what happens to all these convictions when permanent gender alteration is being pumped into our public schools? What happens to all this righteousness when we find out that a large percentage of the children being transitioned by these two men in British Columbia, whose identities are being hidden by the government? By the way, you can find plenty of American news outlets giving their names. Since I'm in Canada, I cannot. But I do encourage people to find their names and identities and peacefully proceed from there. But what happens to all this righteousness when it's revealed that a large percentage of the children these men are transitioning are from the highly traumatized and abused First Nations communities? That's the help they need? So we go from residential schools torturing and murdering First Nations children into now permanent, life-altering experimental medical procedures behind parents' backs? Okay, yeah, that'll really heal that community. Great work, that's gonna help. Yep, that'll help the trauma, the generational trauma. So even though 90% of the children who experience some form of gender dysphoria, which is certainly made worse by a curriculum that is constantly telling children that gender doesn't really exist and is a perpetually changing spectrum, grow out of it. 90% grow out of it and find their adult identity through maturing and understanding themselves and the world better. These same activists who are going on about intersex babies having medical procedures that they can't consent to forced upon them are also pushing permanent medical procedures onto children who cannot consent behind the backs of their parents. This is twisted, demonic, disgusting trickery. How can you teach children on the one hand that altering these intersex children is morally wrong, and then you go and you change those children's bodies permanently in a way that they cannot understand? And here's the thing. In Canada, if this happens to you, you have no legal powers as a parent. Because in the case of CD, the left-wing extremism wasn't just in the school's counseling program, quietly telling this girl she was a boy for 2 years, nor was it in the school's program that had the girl set up with a physician to permanently sterilize her, but it was in the courts as well. Once the father got into the legal battle and was arrested and imprisoned numerous times, it soon became clear that the extreme left-wing politics that had driven the permanent alteration of his daughter was in the courts too. CD was met by BC Supreme Court Justice Francesca Marzari, who has a history of serving as counsel for the radical, feminist, pro-transgender group West Coast Leaf. Impartial justice, you say? Okay, but that's not all. Even though his child was not old enough to consent to having legal representation, even though the law states that the child needs their parents to consent to their legal representation, this child was simply given one of the most radical LGBTQ lawyers in BC as her representation, and they just kind of brushed that pesky law aside. So pesky. Shoo! Get out of here. No. That law doesn't count. So is this really all about the child? Well, when CD's child asked that he not be imprisoned, when the child said, "Don't imprison my father," they ignored this request. And now it becomes clear that this is a far-left extremist ideology pumping constant changes and situations that a child of this age simply could not understand, could not consent to. And of course, this meant that eventually they just went against the child's wishes because this is political. It's not child-centered. So this vindictive team of far-left extremists operating within the BC legal system took this as far as possible. They even sought to take away the money sent to CD via a funding page online to make sure he didn't receive the financial support that was pouring in as a result of all the people who are absolutely appalled by this. So, coming back to the teacher recently exposed in California as a communist in the classroom, we have a problem in North America. The schools are weapons of war now. I advocate homeschooling and unschooling for this very reason, but I also know that homeschooling is a privilege. Not all parents can pull this off. It's a monumental feat. Those who need the public schooling system should not have to fear for their children's minds or bodies. The family unit needs to be supported and protected as a primary mechanism for guiding children. When the Human Rights Act in British Columbia was modified so that SOGI could be introduced into the schools, the general public was not informed. There was no democratic process. On July 25, 2016, there was a surprise reading of Bill 27 to amend the BC Human Rights Act. Yet somehow, over 100 left-wing activists knew about it. The bill was read and passed in one day. In a matter of hours, it was law. No debate, no discussion, no mainstream media coverage, and absolutely record-breaking speeds in the change of fundamental human rights laws. This is the face of extremism. Rushed laws, surrounded by radicals, is the opposite of democracy. The extreme left is now a physical, emotional, and spiritual danger to our children across multiple domains in our society. We need to stand up for our children. That includes masking, mandatory vaccines, and coercive social environments that deny children the right to play and socialize freely, based on a virus which by all measurements has a statistical zero chance of harming them. In addition to the now well-identified threats of communist indoctrination and permanent medical alterations. Big love to CD and all the parents out there who are the voices emerging from their loss to warn us all. Thank you. If you want to continue to support my work, please follow me on all my other platforms. I am always up against censorship that makes it very hard to keep growing my audience. Check me out on Telegram, YouTube, Rumble. I'm just getting started there, bear with me. The dumpster fire known as Twitter, and you can also check out my premium content on rise.tv and dauntlessdialogue.com, especially my latest release, Vague Rules, which specifically addresses communism and far-left ideologues infiltrating North American society. Given that I literally spend my time theorizing about those who conspire against us, I am actually an advocate for conspiracy theory. Fuck their weaponization of this term. This planet does have a problem with elites conspiring against the people. Without constant research and theory, this problem will not get solved. So grab a Theorize About Conspiracies shirt from my store, and if there's a design you want that I don't have, holler at me and I'll be sure to add it. You can also support me by checking out Good Resonance Wellness through my beautiful partner, Amanda, who is constantly offering epic wisdom on how to live health freedom to the fullest through essential oils, astrology, human design, and much more. Get her insight, get some essential oils, get her free ebook. Go to Good Resonance on Instagram and hit her up because supporting her work is supporting my work. Thank you guys. Peace out.